It is Happy Mother's Day, and we're going to be talking about the Canaanite woman. But as I was reading through this week, I kind of realized, and not to pick on our Christian forefathers that put the headlines in the Bible and the verse numbers and stuff, but they call it the Canaanite woman, and I want to change just one word. I want to call this the Canaanite mother. And I'm doing that right now. It already says, I apologize. Okay, I thought about this morning. And it is Mother's Day, and it fits. But changing that word to mother, it kind of changes our perspective as we're reading through these verses. So I just want to put that in our heads that we're looking at the Canaanite mother today. All right, we as a culture, I've kind of realized, we do not handle rejection very well. Not because we don't experience it. We experience it constantly. Job applications, college admissions, relationships, business proposals, creative works that we sent out into the world. Rejection is kind of woven into the fabric of any life that tries to do something. But we've developed an entire kind of cultural script for how to respond to it. And that script has essentially one move: protect yourself from the next one. We either keep our expectations so low that we won't be disappointed, or we hedge our bets, or we have a backup plan for the backup plan. And we put a limit on how much we're willing to want something so that if it doesn't come through, we haven't overexposed ourselves. We are, as a culture, very sophisticated at protecting ourselves from the pain of a no that we really didn't want to hear. What we are not very good at, though, is pressing through it, staying in the conversation after the first no, or the second, or the third, of coming back to the thing we need with the same intensity we had the first time after that first one didn't work out. And that's not something we tend to admire in people. In fact, we have a word for it, and the word we usually call it is desperate. In our cultural vocabulary, desperate is not a compliment. When I first met Lance, when I came here, and we kind of did the sniff test before the hiring, hopefully that's not, the hiring process started, I was getting pretty desperate. I've been looking for a job for 9 months, and I was getting tired of eating top ramen. But I thought I hit it pretty well. And so we go and we meet at CPK, and we had a nice lunch, and I felt like I really put my best foot forward. Years later, Lance says to me, "No, you seemed pretty desperate." But I want to spend some time today with a woman, with a mother who was desperate, who had a need that she had run out of other options, who walked up to someone who had every cultural reason to dismiss her. A woman, a mother who received 3 levels of dismissal in a row and pressed through them all. But before that, football. Because in February 2018, a backup quarterback named Nick Foles led the Philadelphia Eagles to their first Super Bowl championship in franchise history and was named the game's MVP. Foles had been a Pro Bowl quarterback in 2013, one of the best seasons any quarterback had put together in years, including tying the NFL record for most touchdown passes in a single game. The following year, he fell apart. He was traded to the Rams, where he struggled badly. He was benched halfway through the season. Then the Rams came to LA, and they drafted Jared Goff, the first overall pick, making it just clear they were done with Foles, and he requested a release. He went to Kansas City as a backup. He barely played. And then in the summer of 2016, he nearly walked away from football entirely. But his wife, Tori, she wrote him a 4-page letter. She told him she didn't want him to quit out of fear. She told him that she believed there's something still inside of him, that the game wasn't finished with him yet. And somewhere in that letter, something shifted. Foles later said, I remember hearing a small thing my stomach was saying. What are you most afraid of? I was most afraid to go back and play because of what I experienced in St. Louis. I was afraid, but I knew from my faith and reading the word and going through life that God will be with me if I walk away from the game or if I go back. But the thing I'm most afraid of, I should probably go back at it. So he calls Andy Reid, he goes back. He signs with the Eagles as a backup. The guy who's just kind of holding the clipboard. Nobody in the stadium even knows his name anymore. His job was just to kind of be ready for a moment that's probably never going to come. But then Carl Wentz goes down. He tears his ACL. December 2017, 4 weeks left before the playoffs. And Foles is thrust into the starting role. The city of Philadelphia has been written off. Nobody gave them a serious chance. And Foles, the backup who nearly quit, who'd been benched and traded and released, who had pressed back through every no, led them all the way to the Super Bowl. He both threw and caught a touchdown in the same game, the first player to do that in Super Bowl history. And the Eagles beat the Patriots 41-33. And when he stood at the podium afterward, he didn't talk about his talent or his preparation. He talked about his faith. He talked about embracing struggle. He said, when you look at a struggle in your life, just know that's just an opportunity for your character to grow. Nick Foles got every signal that the answer was no. The trade was a no, the bench was a no, the release was a no. Nearly quitting entirely was this almost final no. But what he chose, guided by faith, pushed by his wife's letter, was to go back toward the thing he was most afraid of and press through. The mother we're about to read about did something similar, except the no's she received were not from a coaching staff or a front office. They came from Jesus. And she pressed through all of them. So in this story, Jesus it says he's withdrawn from Galilee. He went off to the district of Tyre and Sidon. This is Gentile territory. He's outside the boundaries of his primary ministry, which had been Israel. He is in some sense kind of off the map. And there's this woman that he finds there. It says in 15:21, Jesus withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." So Matthew identifies her as this Canaanite woman. In the Old Testament, Canaan is the name for the land Israel was given. And the Canaanites were the people on the other side of Israel's history. Not just Gentiles in a general sense, but historically the people group most associated with the cultural and religious divide between Israel and everyone else. Matthew's first century Jewish reader would have felt the weight of that identification immediately. This woman has no standing. She has no claim on a Jewish rabbi. She would not be in this conversation. And then she opens the conversation with a very theologically loaded title, Lord, Son of David. Because Son of David, it's a messianic title. It's a term used for the promised king from David's lineage who would come to rescue Israel. It's this Jewish title drawn from Jewish scripture, referring to Jewish expectation. And a Canaanite woman is using it to address Jesus because she recognizes something true about him before she knows what he can do. She's not approaching him as a curiosity or as a last resort that she's skeptical about. She's approaching with an understanding about his identity that many of the people in the crowd wouldn't have even had yet. She's driven. She's driven as a mother with a daughter who's been severely oppressed by a demon. In fact, Matthew's word, kakos satia, it means badly or grievously to the worst possible degree. It's an ambitious statement. She's in an ambitious situation. She has a child in real suffering and she's run out of options. And there's one person left who might be able to do something. And persistent faith almost always begins here. Not in a season of spiritual comfort, not in a moment of theological clarity about how things are going to work out. It begins in need that has exhausted everything else. She's not a model of having everything together. She's a model of knowing exactly where to take the thing that is falling apart. She didn't come to Jesus because she had standing. She came because she had nowhere else to go. And now we get to the hard part of the text, because she cries out to Jesus and he gives her 3 levels of dismissal. The first one is silence. But he did not answer her a word. And the disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she's crying out after us." Did not answer a word. It's not a gentle redirection. Not a, I hear you, but she cries out and she hears nothing back. If you've ever prayed something and had real urgency and felt like that prayer went nowhere, no confirmation, no sense of movement, no impression that it landed where it needed to go, you know what this moment feels like from the inside. The silence, it's not neutral. It feels like weight. And the longer it goes, the more convincing the story becomes that the answer is simply no. Or worse, that nobody's listening. And then the disciples pile on, right? They urge Jesus to send her away. She's a disruption. She's out of place. She's making a scene. The social pressure, the cultural pressure, and now the pressure from the people closest to Jesus are all pointing in the same direction. This isn't going anywhere, and you should get out. And then the second dismissal, it's a policy statement. He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." He's not being cruel. He's just stating that the actual scope of his mission. The priority of his ministry is Israel, and she's not Israel. And there's a theological and a historical ordering to the way that the gospel moves in the New Testament. It says to the Jew first, and then also to the Greek, as Paul writes later. And Jesus is kind of operating in that ordering. But what it feels like from the receiving end is that you fall outside the scope of what I'm doing, and I'm not for you. And if the silence hadn't sent her away, and the social pressure hadn't sent her away, and the policy statement, that's the reasonable place to stop. And she doesn't have a counter argument. She can't change her ethnicity or her religious background. She is what she is. And what she's just been told clearly is that she falls outside the program. But she doesn't go. But she came and knelt before him saying, "Lord, help me." She kneels. She worships. She reduces her request to the 3 simplest possible words. Lord, help me. She's not arguing her case. She's not presenting a rebuttal to the policy statement. She's just still there, still on her knees, still asking. And then the third dismissal, to me the hardest one. And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Seems he's calling her a dog, or at least using the image of dogs. Even the softer reading of the context would be that the word used there maybe meant a household pet rather than like some street dog. But it doesn't change the basic force of what he said. She's being placed in a category below the children. She's outside. She doesn't belong at the table. That's what Jesus said. And that's troubled careful readers for this text for a long time. And I think it kind of should, because the discomfort is real. We're not supposed to find it easy. But here's what we want to notice. She has now received everything our culture associates with a clear signal to stop. Silence, a reasonable policy that excludes her, a hard word that diminishes her standing. The disciples urge her to leave. Everything in that moment is pointing in one direction, to go. But she stays. She experienced what felt like 3 layers of refusal from Jesus, and she didn't leave. Because after the silence, the policy, the hard word, she's still there, still kneeling, still in the conversation. It seems to me that there are at least 3 reasonable things a person can do when the no's pile up like that. You can walk away and conclude the answer is clearly no. You can get angry, decide that the God you thought was good isn't who you thought he was. You can shrink, accept the verdict, reduce the ask, settle for less than what your daughter actually needs. But she does none of those things. And then she shows us why. And what she asks, or what she says next, I should say, it's kind of the pivot of the whole story. She said in verse 27, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." The first thing we want to notice is what she doesn't do. She doesn't correct him. She doesn't argue that the image is unfair or that maybe she deserves a better category. She doesn't say, actually, I'm at the table too. She doesn't demand a seat, one that she hasn't been given. She says yes. She concedes a yes before she makes her argument. She steps inside the metaphor that he offered and works with it. And then she does something with it. If the children are at the table, she says, and the dogs are on the floor, fine. I'm on the floor. And the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. So she doesn't argue that she deserves a seat. She's not claiming rights she doesn't have. She's making an entirely different argument. She's arguing his abundance. She's saying, I know what I am, but I also know who you are. And who you are is so large that even the overflow, even what falls from the edges of what you're doing for the people you came for, is more than enough for my daughter. It's an argument not from her worth, it's an argument from his character. And that argument seems to work. When you come to God on the basis of what you deserve, you're already standing on uncertain ground. Because on your best day, we're still asking for more than we've earned. But when we come to God on the basis of who he is, his power, his capacity, his abundance, and the fact that even the edges of what he's doing are more than sufficient for what you need, we're standing on a ground that can't be taken from us. Nick Foles, standing at the podium after the Super Bowl, didn't talk about why he deserved that moment. He talked about the God who had been with him through the moments that looked like no's. He didn't argue his worth. He pointed something larger than himself that had been carrying him through the whole journey. And the Canaanite woman does the same thing. But she does it in the middle of the rejection rather than on the other side of it. She makes her argument from the abundance before she knows what the answer will be. And that's faith. Not certainty about the outcome, but certainty about the person. She didn't argue her worth, she argued his abundance. So let's think about something before we get to the second half. When the question is, what are you pressing toward right now? What feels like it's already received a no? Not the request that you haven't made yet, but one you've made. One that feels like it hasn't moved. That you've been tempted to quietly set down because the silence or the wall or the hard word, it started to feel like the final answer. And when you press towards it, when you pray, when you bring it to God, what is the argument you're making? Are you making the argument from your worth, from your own record, from your faithfulness, from your standing? Or are you making the argument from his character? From the fact that he is large enough that even what falls from the edges of his abundance is more than sufficient for what you need? Because those are different prayers. And the Canaanite woman is going to show us what happens when you press through the no's with the right perspective. Verse 28, then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Jesus only called two people's faith great in the entire Gospel of Matthew, and this is one of them. Not Peter when he walked on water, not the disciples who left everything to follow him, not the religious leaders who had spent their entire careers studying the scriptures. A Canaanite woman, no standing, no credentials, no cultural access, 3 no's behind her. Great is your faith. It's worth asking what Jesus is actually commending here, because I think we can miss it if we're not careful. So we tend to assume that great faith means like a confident faith, the kind that never wavers, never doubts, always has a clear sense of what God is doing, the kind of faith that looks steady from the outside, the kind that produces very inspiring Instagram content. But that's not what Jesus is pointing at. This woman was desperate. She was in a situation that had no good options. She had been dismissed 3 times by the person she needed most. There's just nothing steady looking about what she was doing. She's kneeling on the ground saying, Lord, help me, after being told she didn't qualify. And what Jesus calls great is not the absence of desperation, but it's the direction of it. He's commending the fact that her desperation kept pointing her toward him through the silence, through the policy, through that hard word. She never redirected her need anywhere else. She never concluded that he wasn't worth pressing toward. She kept calling him Lord. She kept kneeling. She stayed in the conversation until she heard everything that he had to say. There's a difference worth naming here, I should say, between persistent faith and what we call a stubborn hoping. A stubborn hoping is attached to an outcome. I will not stop until I get the specific thing I came for. I will not stop until I get the specific thing that I want. It's essentially a negotiation strategy. Stubborn hoping can look like faith from the outside, but underneath it's a demand. And when the demand isn't met, stubborn hoping eventually becomes bitterness. But a persistent faith is different, because persistent faith is attached to a person. It says, I will not stop coming to this person because I believe he is who I think he is. And I trust that whatever he gives me is worth staying for. Persistent faith can hold a no without collapsing, because the no doesn't change what it believes about the one it's pressing toward. It can stay in the conversation even when the conversation is hard, because the relationship is more important than any single answer. The Canaanite woman never changes what she calls Jesus across this entire encounter. Every time she speaks, she calls him Lord. She's worshiping in the middle of rejection. She's acknowledging who he is even while she's pressing for something he hasn't given her yet. And that's not stubbornness about the outcome. It's an unshakable confidence in the person. And then what does Jesus give her? Everything she asked for. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. The same word Matthew uses for other healings. It's immediate. It's complete. It's not partial improvement that needs to be monitored over time. It's everything. And Jesus commends her. And he commends her before the healing. He commends her for the faith. The word great is the thing he leads with. The healing is the answer to her request. The word great is his assessment of what she brought to the conversation. And I think that ordering matters. He's saying the way you stayed in this itself is worth naming. The persistence was not just a technique that produces a result. It was in itself a demonstration of something real about what you believe about me. Great faith is not faith that never doubts. It's a faith that keeps pointing towards Jesus even when everything else points away. So what is the prayer you've been tempted to set down? Not because you stop believing God can answer it, but because pressing towards it keeps costing you something. Because the no's keep piling up. What is your silent prayer in your heart? The prayer that's going long enough that you started to wonder if the asking itself is a problem. The Canaanite woman's story says the pressing is not the problem. The pressing is the faith. And the faith that keeps pointing towards Jesus through the nose is exactly the faith he turns around and calls great. Before we close, there's something underneath this story that changes what it means to press towards God when the answer is silence. Because Jesus himself, in the Garden of Gethsemane, prays a prayer that receives a no for an answer. It says in Matthew 26, and going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. He falls on his face. He asks his Father if there's another way. He prays it 3 times. The same number of dismissals the Canaanite woman received. And each time, the answer is the same. The cup does not pass. The Father does not remove it. The God who says to this woman, great is your faith, knows what it feels like to press toward the Father with a desperate request and hear no. He's not watching her persistence from a comfortable distance. He's not commending a posture that he's never taken himself. He entered it. He fell on his face in a garden and asked for the thing he wanted most in that moment and was told it wasn't possible. And he went to the cross anyway. Which means the no Jesus received in Gethsemane is what makes every other prayer possible. Because the cross is the place where God's ultimate answer to the human race was given. Not the answer any of us would have written. Not the answer that looked in the moment like anything other than devastation, but the answer that turned out to be everything. Romans 5 says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we're still sinners, Christ died for us. Wow. That word is doing the same work that it did for the Canaanite woman's crumbs argument. She didn't wait until she was qualified. She didn't wait until she had standings or credentials or a legitimate claim. She pressed towards Jesus while she was still an outsider, while she still had nothing to offer, while the no's were still fresh. And God in Jesus pressed towards her in the same way. Not after we deserved it, not after we cleaned ourselves up sufficiently, while we were still sinners. While we're still the thing that should have disqualified us, he came anyway. The cross is God's crumb argument made flesh. He's saying, I know what you are, but I also know who I am. And who I am is large enough that I can give you at the cost of everything, and it's more sufficient than everything that's broken inside of you. The Canaanite woman argued from his abundance before she knew how large that abundance actually was. She was arguing from the crumbs. She didn't know yet that the God she was pressing toward was about to pour himself out completely on the cross for people with no standing and no credential and no claim except their need. For us, the good news is we know. We live on the outside of it. We know what abundance actually is. We know what the cost is. We know that the God we're pressing towards in our unanswered prayer is a God who did not withhold his own son, who pressed through the ultimate no so that our pressing toward him would never be in vain. The reason we can keep pressing him is that Jesus already pressed all the way through for you. Last week, Elizabeth showed us a long kind of faith, decades of ordinary faithfulness, showing up again and again in the silence until the moment came when she was ready to receive what God had been preparing for her. This week, the Canaanite woman shows us the pressing kind, the faith that stays in a hard conversation, that finds a way through every wall, that argues from abundance rather than worth, and refuses to accept silence as a sentence. But both are real, and both are honored, and both land at the same place at the foot of the cross. They go to a God who's larger than any no. Let me pray. Father, I want to pray for everyone in this room who's been carrying a prayer that keeps hitting a wall. The one who's been pressing towards you through the silence. And it's starting to wonder whether the silence means something. The one who's received a no that felt like a policy, like they fall outside what you're doing for other people. The one who's heard a hard word that's made them want to stop asking. Lord, remind them of this woman. Remind them that great is your faith. Remind them that great is your faith is what you say to a person who's pressed through 3 no's. Remind them that pressing is not the problem. The pressing is the faith. And remind them that the argument that works is never the one about their worth. It's always the one about yours. Because Father, you are large enough. You are abundant enough. Whatever whatever we are bringing to you today, however long it's been, however many walls it's hit, you are not too small for it. Father, the cross is a proof that you do not turn away the people who come to you desperate, with nothing to offer but their need and their trust in who you are. Father, help us to stay in that conversation. Help us to keep kneeling. Help us to keep calling you Lord even when the answer hasn't come yet. In your name we pray. Amen.